for these last two questions, I want to get into Ejido. You know, I have some clients. Well, I have a lot of people that are looking in the Todos Santos area at Todos Santos Pescadero, and we were going through. We just stopped at somebody's house, and I told them, I said, "Look, Ejido Land. Anything Ejido is off limits. We're not touching." And we'll get into Ejido, what it is, and then the dangers of it. But the lady who owned the house, she goes, "Oh, yeah, it's so easy." Like you can go, and they kind of looked at, the clients looked at me and they're like, "Hey, you said Ejido was like this process that you don't even touch with, and here's," and I was like, "No, no, no." So can we just kind of clear up, maybe just kind of like a short version of what Ejido Land is, and then like what are the dangers, which last time we talked, Eduardo, I mean, it can be plentiful what you can get into.
Well, obviously, it depends if you have another hour to spare on the explanation. Ejido goes back to the Mexican Revolution, and it's a way to have land that is fertile, land that is proper for not only farming but also for livestock, and also for example, wood and things of that nature. So they divided up certain areas of Mexico through Ejido, which is common ownership. So the federal government in 1950, and even after the revolution, before the Mexican Constitution of 1917, which it finally made it into the Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution, provided the Ejido, which is communal property. So they granted, peasants, people that till the soil, the ability to benefit from the land, to cultivate their land, to sell the produce, to sell the livestock or anything derived from the land, and it was basically shared. So it was not private property, but it was a way to also have some sort of political control over these people, over these what we call them communities or villages. So it got to a point where the Ejido was so vast that until 1992, there are areas of Mexico that had already been granted maybe twice over. So you had all these decrees of expropriation of basically eminent domain saying, okay, this is now expropriated for the use of Ejido San Jose, Ejido Pescadero. So you have all these pockets of land, but as the country grew in population, what happened was that they needed to have more areas of development. But guess what? Those areas were Ejido, and they really couldn't do anything with that land other than the uses that they were there for. They were there for farming or for livestock or for forestry, fisheries, even depending on the region. And eventually, in 1992, the new agrarian law basically suspended any further tracts of land granting government land to certain villages and areas and this and that. So as of 1992, which is now 30 years, there is no more or new ejidos as far as new areas. So all these other areas are basically that you find in the Todos Santos area. They're probably from the 1970s and 1980s. These land grants. So these land grants, under the new law, new from 30 years ago, they had the ability to transition from communal ownership to private ownership. It's not an easy process. It's almost a handmade process. It's super complex as far as what needs to happen. The concept is pretty simple. It's like, okay, there's this land that maybe 50 people can lay claim to it, but since there's an area large enough to accommodate those interests, then they can have individual parcels and say, okay, parcel 1, parcel 2, parcel 3, and then they are granted these individual parcels of land, as opposed to the other one. So it's no longer common, it's in the middle of becoming private property. So you have these parcels of land that are denominated probably by numbers. From there, that person that owns parcel says, okay, I want to have private property of this parcel. So then there's what we call Asamblea de Dominio Pleno. That's a term of art which is full, or let's say translation would be like full ownership or full domain assembly, or the meeting of these ejido landowners. And they basically say, okay, who wants to have their parcels of land now transition to private property? So they raise their hands and say, okay, we want this. The tricky part, Fletcher, is the right of first refusal. Because once you have that, and they're granted these parcels individually, anybody from the outside of the ejido village or area coming in wanting to buy is basically in the second row. The first row of buyers are the others. And so you basically say, I'm selling it to Fletcher. He's from outside the ejido, but he wants to buy. Does anybody want to buy my land? And these are the terms. And so they have the ability to use those same terms that you're going into and say, okay, yeah, I want. So let's say that process is done. No one else wants to buy it. And it's done formally with a notary public, with the representatives of the ejido. And again, it's tricky to have everything in place properly done. You need to have specialized counsel for that. And once that happens, then you can then come in and say, okay, yeah, you are the former ejido now is a private property and transition. So all that process, it's not that it can't be done, it's just that it's a very particular process. And if you don't do it the right way, then there are a lot of causes of action for annulments on that process. And so it's just a mess. And people say, oh yeah, I want this, yeah, but then you have to first get it out of ejido into this full domain meeting minutes, have that done, get the right of first refusal, make sure that no one else wants it, because there's 100% it needs to say, because if you miss one, that other one, you basically, even if 10 years pass, he still has it right, because it's not subject to what we call prescription or negative prescription, which is basically passage of time, and it's not subject to statute of limitations. And so they say, okay, I'm sorry, I was not summoned properly to the meeting. I was doing this and that. So there's things that happen. So I always am wary of that. It's not that it's impossible. It's just I've just seen so many problems with that. And but if it's done the right way, and again, let's speak frankly, all of this was ejido at one point in time.
Yeah.
Why? Because in the 1960s, this was part of whatever ejido San Jose, and then the government stepped in and expropriated that, and then handed it over to Fonatur, which is a government tourist agency. And so our title, all of this comes from 1974, 75. There is decrees of expropriation, eminent domain, so we don't have to worry about the ejido. But there's pockets that did not come into that area of expropriation from the federal government, so that's why you have to deal with that. And if you're dealing with that as a private party coming in on a first attempt, let's say, to purchase this, yeah, you're in for a ride. Again, it's not impossible, it's just complex. And but yeah, eventually, people are not, it's just common sense. If they know that people are willing to do this and willing to buy, it eventually will come to the point where people are going to be willing to say, hey, this is worth more as private property than ejido. Let's get what we need to do to get these parcels of land into private ownership. Once it's private, then another third party can come in and purchase that. So that's why title insurance companies do not grant title insurance policies over this until all these things have passed, and so that there's a lot of caveats and
So
fine prints on that.
once if the process is done correct and it's essentially privatized under titled under another owner, there's no risk of it ever going back to a DO.
Yeah. Obviously,
Okay.
yeah. If it's done properly, yeah, then it's done.
And-
It's private property from here on out, and you don't have to worry about further claims.
And these ejido lots can have up to like 100, 150 you wouldn't even call them owners, correct?
Yeah, right now, you're probably looking at anywhere from 20 to 100 to 200 people participating in that. There's a lot of processes that now have been in transition over these 30 years, and they have parcels. So you're not looking at huge amounts of land. You're like, oh, this parcel. So it's divided. It's not yet private, but it's like, hey, I'm the one that holds the right to that. So with the certificate of parcel, what we call certificado parcelario, then you can say, okay, I want to transition into that. Then there's this assembly, and then this whole song and dance is done. But yeah, it's not rocket science, but it is complex because of certain things that need to happen. But yeah, there's definitely someone, specialized counsel, that needs to hold your hand and basically ensure that everything is in place. And even then,
you can still, And to really kind of wrap it up on this, let's just say it's a really nice piece of property and it's Ejido, but they offer you like a deal and you're like, okay, yeah, you can build on it. That's going to come back to bite you because you could build something really nice, but at the end of the day, if it's on their Ejido land, they ultimately have control, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but there's a huge development near Los Cabos that people probably did not know coming in that they were actually just getting leasehold rights, basically no property, just possession, and they were not fully explained that they might build something up, but they definitely cannot lay claim to that building because it's subject to a lease agreement. Now, when that lease is up, that improvement is going to go to the queue, period. And again, it's not subject to statute of limitations. So all of that. So if people are explaining the process properly, which I get it from this particular development I'm thinking of, it started in '94. So if people were explaining back in 1994 that you had the ability to basically pay a lowball figure for a pretty nice property close to the water, and you have the ability to build on it, then you wouldn't have to worry about that. Just knowing that when the 30 years are up on that master lease, that's the end of the ride. You basically can't give it to your children, be part of your estate planning. It's like, hey, I had the good use of a property. I paid whatever for it, but paid much less than the market value that I would have paid. So if I came in at day one, that's good. It still made sense for people coming in on year 20 if the amount per year was still it was lower, or you didn't have to worry about building yourself, and basically when you came in, it was already built out. You just made minor improvements to whatever's there. But then people say, no, this is mine. It's like, well, no, it's not yours. And the Ejido eventually might come to a negotiation, but it's not like they're going to hold the higher hand.
Yeah.
Period. It's like, okay, you want it?
Yeah, you kind of know how that one's going to end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Eduardo, man, thank you so much for your time, as always. And just anybody that's listening or watching, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Email is best. It's info at jetslaw, jetzlaw.com. info@jetslaw.com. And they have my phone number there and website and my address. But as you can see, you're always welcome here. And we're doing every time that we come down here, we have new additions. So hopefully the next time we can do some other scenario here in the office.
Awesome. We'll keep mixing it up. Well, thank you again, Eduardo, and we'll keep them coming.